Sit on your bed one day and ask yourself, what remarkably stupid thing am I doing on a regular basis to absolutely screw up my life? And if you actually ask that question, but you have to want to know the answer, right? Because that's actually what asking the question means. Doesn't mean just mouthing the words. It means you have to decide that you want to know. You will figure out that so fast. It'll make your hair curl. There is no better pathway of self-realization and the ennoblement of being then to deposit the highest good that you can conceive of and commit yourself to. And you might also think yourself and ask yourself, and this is definitely worth asking, is, do you really have anything better to do? And if you don't, well, why would you do anything else? If you orient yourself properly and then pay attention to what you do every day that works, I actually think that that's in accordance with what we have come to understand about human perception. Because what happens is that the world shifts itself around your aim, because you're a creature that has an aim, and you have to has an aim in order to do something. You're an aiming creature. You look at point and you move towards it. It's built right into you, and so you have an aim. Well, let's say your aim is the highest possible aim. Well, then, so that sets up the world around you. It organizes all your perception. It organizes what you see and you don't see. It organizes your emotion and motivations. So you organize yourself around that aim. And then what happens in the day is that the day manifests itself as a set of challenges and problems. And if you solve them properly, then you stay on the pathway toward that aid, and you can concentrate on the day. And so that way you get to have your cake and eat it too, because you can point into the distance, the far distance, and you can live in the day. And it seems to me that makes every moment of the day supercharged with meaning, because if everything that you're doing every day is related to the highest possible aim that you can conceptualize, well, that's a very definition of meaning that would sustain you in your life. Well, and then the issue is, well, back to Noah. Well, all hell is about to break loose and chaos is coming. It's like when that's happening in your life, you might want to be and to do something that you regard as truly worthwhile, because that's what will keep you afloat when everything is flooded. And you don't want to wait until the flood comes to start doing that, because if your ark is half-built and you don't know how to captain it, the probability is very high that you will drown. Ask and it shall be given you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh, receive it, and he that seeketh, find it, and to him that asketh, it shall be opened. That sounded pretty optimistic again, but again, I think it's a description of the structure of existential reality, by which I mean when I'm in my clinical practice and I observe, and this is also the case with my students. Let's say people's life aren't what they would like them to be, and so then you ask why. Well, forget about tragedy and catastrophe, because that's self-evident and we're not gonna discuss that. Although the degree to which you bring about your own tragedy is always indeterminate, but I would never say that every trouble thing that is visited on a person is something they deserve. I think that's a very dangerous presumption, especially because everyone gets sick and everyone dies. But one of the main reasons that people do not get what they want is because they don't actually figure out what it is, and the probability that you're going to get what would be good for you, let's say, which would even be better than what you want, right? Because you might be wrong about what you want easily, but maybe you could get what would really be good for you. Well, why don't you? Well, because you don't try, you don't think, okay, here is what I would like if I could have it. And I don't mean in a way that you manipulate the world to force it, to deliver your goods for status or something like that. That isn't what I mean. I mean something like, imagine that you were taking care of yourself, like you were someone you actually cared for, and then you thought, okay, I'm caring for this person, I would like things to go as well for them as possible. Why would their life have to be like in order for that to be the case? Well, people don't do that. They do not sit down and think, all right, let's figure it out. You have a life. It's hard, obviously. I think 3 years from now you can have what you need. You gotta be careful about that. You can't have everything. You can have what would be good for you, but you have to figure out what it is, and then you have to have an aim. Well, my experience with people has been is, if they figure out what it is that would be good for them, then they aim at it and they get it. And the strange thing, it's not quite that simple, because you may formulate an idea about what would be good for you, and then you take 10 steps toward that. You find out that your formulation was a bit off, and so you have to reformulate the goal. So you're gonna like this as you move toward the goal. But the huge part of a reason that people fail is because they do not even set up the criteria for success. And so since success is very narrow line and very unlikely, the probability that you're gonna stumble on it randomly is 0. And there is a proposition here, and the proposition is, if you actually want something, you can have it. Now the question then would be, well, what do you mean by actually want? The answer is that you reorient your life in every possible way to make the probability that will occur as certain as possible. And this is sacrificial idea, right? It's like you don't get anything, obviously, but maybe you can have what you need, and maybe all you have to do to get it is ask. By asking, but asking isn't a whim or today's wish. I think you have to be deadly serious about it. You have to think, okay, I'm taking stock of myself, and if I was going to live properly in the world, and I was going to set myself up such that being would justify itself in my estimation. And I don't mean as a harsh judge, exactly what is it that I would aim at. And so the issue is not so much the blindness of others, even though there is so much blindness among others as there is for you. But the issue here, the advice here, the description here is, you should be connected about what is interfering with your aim and your own vision first. And you should leave other people the hell alone in relationship to that. And so if your mode of being in this world is, if you would just act better things which would improve for me, and if you identify the evil and the catastrophe as something that is outside, that someone else need to fix, or that someone else is responsible for, then you're not gonna fix that, and you're gonna remain blind to the thing that you're doing or not doing that make things not good well. And so it's just better to think, alright, I'm probably blind in my way, many ways, and maybe there are some ways that I could rectify that, because it's highly that you're blind in all sorts of ways. In fact, it's virtually certain. And so it is just more useful to think, how is it that I'm wrong in this situation? I'll tell you something that I learned to do when I was arguing with my wife, which happened quite frequently, because when you actually communicate with people, you find out that there is many things that you don't agree on, and that's because you're actually different creatures. And so if you're actually going to have a truthful conversation, then you're gonna find out that you don't see things the same way, and then you can either pretend that that's not the case and gloss over it, and then end up in a 3-year silent war, and you can have the damn fight when you need to have it, and see if you could straighten it out. So now and then we would get it in a situation where we were at loggerheads, we couldn't move, and it would spiral into the speech, the hate one. Let's say, yeah, everyone laughs because they know they manifest plenty of hate speech toward those they love. So one of the things we learned to do was, we had an impulse, was to separate and to go out our own ways, and to go sit and think, okay, look, we're at this unpleasant situation, we can't figure out how to move forward. I would always think, of course, it's her fault. Obviously it's her fault, at least 95%, but maybe there was something I did that contributed like 5% to it. If you do what is that you're called upon to do, which is to lift your eyes up above the mundane daily selfish impulse issues that might beast you, and attempt to enter into relationship with that which you might hold into the highest regrets, whatever that might be, to aim high and to make that improvement above all eyes in your life. And I truly believe that that's the most practical advice that you could possibly receive. The way that you fortify your faith in life is to assume the best, something like that, and then to act courageously in relationship to that, and that's tantamount to expressing your faith in the high possible good. It's tantamount to expressing your faith in God, and it's not matter of stating, well, I believe in the existence of transcendence deity, because in some sense, who cares what you believe? I mean, you might in all that, but that's not the issue. That's not the issue. The issue is, seems to me, is how you act. The issue is not what you believe as if it is a set of facts, but how you conduct yourself in the world. The purpose of thinking is to let your thought die instead of you. It's a brilliant notion, and so the idea is something like you can conjure up a representation of yourself. You can conjure up a variety of potential representation of yourself in the future. You can lay out how those future representations of yourself are likely to prevail or fail. You can call the potential use in the future that will fail, and then you can embody the ones that will succeed. You do that while simultaneously conjuring up a representation of your current state and determining for yourself, because of your undue suffering, which elements of your pathetic being need to be given up so that you can move forward into the future. And the goal, what it is that you're aiming at with that work and that sacrifice, that's ultimate question. What it is and what is it that you're trying to do? Are you trying to improve the future? We believe that the future can be improved. We believe that it can be improved as a consequence of our sacrificial work. And so, once again, what are the limitations and consequences of our sacrificial work? What are limits so that? What are the necessary limits so that? I would say we don't know. We conjure up this remarkable idea. The future exists. We can see it even thought. It's only potential. We can adjust our behavior in the present in order to maximize our probability of success in the future. How best do that? Well, the idea of something like, I don't hesitate to offer the ultimate sacrifice. If you want the future to turn out ultimately well, what is it that you could contract for? Let's say, if you were willing to give up everything about that's weak and unworthy, the proper sacrificial attitude produces a psychological state and a social state that is manifestation of attitude that decreases the probability that world will carry into hell, and increase the probability that people will live high quality, meaningful, private lives in a society that is balanced and capable of supporting that. And none of that seems to me to be questionable, really. I also don't think it's anything that people don't actually know. People have told me many times that when they listen to me talking, they're hearing things that they already knew and I didn't know how to say. It's something like that, and this is one of those things that I think is exactly like that. I think it's at the very core of our moral knowledge, which is our behavioral knowledge and our perceptual knowledge. Let's get this right. Moral knowledge is no trivial matter. It's knowledge about how it is that you orient yourself in the world. There is no more profoundly necessary form of knowledge. Well, it's predicted on something that is exactly like this. We know that we have to make sacrifice. We know that we have to aim at what is goal. So then why it isn't that we don't aim at what the best and make sacrifices that are necessary in order to bring that into play? I think it seems that to me that in some sense that's self-evident. The question is why we don't do it, but 3 questions and 3 answers to that. Life is hard and it hurts people. It's rife with limitation, and some of it's arbitrary, and some it's unjust, and some of it's malevolent, which is even worse. It's not surprising that combination of adversity can turn people against being, but I think even what that happened, and even when people have the history that if they reveal to you, you would say, well, it's no wonder you turn out that way. The people who turn out that way still know that's wrong. They still know that however deep your own suffering, however arbitrary their own suffering, however much that's caused by the malevolence of others, as well as the tragedy of existence, that doesn't in a way justify their turning away from the goods. And I believe everyone that knows that. I believe that they know it implicitly, even if they do not allow themselves to know it implicitly and explicitly. And I believe that if they volatile the idea, then they volatile themselves and they end up in, Cain's position, which is the position of the man who has been given a punishment that is too great to bear. Now we're capable of making sacrifice in abstraction to conceptualize a feature and a future that we want, to let go of the things that are stopping us from moving forward, and to free ourselves from the chain of our original preconception. Pursue pleasure to follow your impulse. Live for moments. Do what? Experiment. A mountain is something you have to climb, and you have to climb to the pinnacle of a mountain, and the mountain is up, and the mountain stretches up to heaven, and it's a long journey to specify the right place on the highest pinnacle. And that's symbolic because of course it's pinnacle that you're always trying to reach, just like you're always trying to aim. You're always trying to climb upward. At least that's theory. Depends on some degree, of course, on your definition of upward. You're supposed to, again, to act out the highest good of which you're capable. Now, that's all transformation your life to some degree into adventure. There is no way around that, because as you attempt to climb a higher mountain, let's say, or the aim to a higher target or something like that, then the thing around that will become increasingly dramatic and of importance. It happens by necessity, obviously, because if you're aiming at something difficult and profound and you're really working at it, then your life is gonna become perhaps increasingly difficult and profound, but might be okay. That might exactly what you need as an antidote to implicit limitation that face you as a human being. The good father is precisely someone who is willing to sacrifice this child to the ultimate good. You have a moral obligation as a parent to encourage your child to go out in the world, right? And to be whoever they can be, to be the best they can possibly be. And in doing that, you're encouraging them to pursue the goods. You're sacrificing them to the goods. You're not keeping them for yourself selfishly. You're telling them that they could go out and live their life and live it properly. You don't want for your son what it is that you want for him. You want for your son what would be best for him and for the world. And you let go in precise proportion to your desire to have that happen. When you have an infant, you do something for the infant because the infant can do nothing for him and herself. But as the infant matures and is increasingly capable of doing things for him or herself, then you will pull back, right? You pull back. And every time the child develops the ability to do something, you allow them to encourage them to do, and you don't interfere. So if your child is struggling getting dressed, well, obviously there is something that you help them, but mostly you let them learn so that they can know how to do it in future. That's better for you, and it's certainly better for them. There is a rule if you're working with the elderly in the old age home. The rule is something like, don't do anything for any of the guests, let's say, that they can do for themselves, because you're compromise their independence. And so as a mother, you pull back and you pull back and you let your children hit him or herself against the world, and you fail to protect them. But by failing to protect them, you encourage and ennoble them to point where you're no longer necessary. Now they may still want to see you, and it would be wonderful if that was the case, but the point is that you're supposed to remove yourself from the question by encouraging your child to be the best possible person that person can be, and you sacrifice your desire, all of your desire, so that your personal desire, even your desire for your child's relationship to you, because you want them to move forward into the world as a light on a hill. That's what we want if we have any sense. And so you don't get to keep your children at home because you need them. How do we come to know ourselves? And more importantly, potential. One of the first ways to come to know yourself is to understand that you don't. You can learn to watch yourself like you're watching a stranger, and you have to understand that you don't know who you. And that's not easy to understand because you think you know, but then you remember you cannot control yourself very well. We're not very disciplined. We're full of flaws because maybe you don't don't know yourself as well as you think, but it's hard to get low enough to understand how deeply it is the case that you're going ignorant about who are you now. There is an upside so that too, which also that you're also ignorant about who you could be. And so the discovery of that, in some rewards for the honor of determining who you actually are. Then you watch yourself like you're watching a stranger. You watch what you say and listen. You think, well, what sort of person would say that? And how I'm reacting emotionally when I'm communicating in that matter. It's that making me feel stronger, weaker. Is it filling me with shame? Is it helping me with confidence? Am I laying out light? Am I deceiving myself and other people? Am I adapting this personality at parties that is designed to impress and to amuse? And it comes across as nothing but self-centered narcissism. What are my dark fantasies? What are my aggressive fantasies? What it is? What is it that I'm willing to do? What am I interested in so that I'll spontaneously pursue it? What do I procrastinate about and why? What am I unwilling to do? What do I think is good? What do I congratulate myself for accomplishing? And what do I berate myself for failing to confront and to implement? Those are all incredibly complicated questions, and you don't know the answer to them. So that to start, and then in the terms of potential, well, you will consider a little bit more about your potential as you discover who you are, especially darker parts of yourself, because then you discover your potential for mayhem. There is one real unity in that, a discovery that you're dangerous. It is such a useful discovery. It's actually something that strengthens you, because the first thing that is realization light that can, in fact, produce is the ambition to incorporate that danger into a higher order personality, and that can make you incompletable. I can make you someone who can say no when you need to say no, that can make you someone who won't avoid necessary conflict. And so that's unbelievably useful. And so that one of the potentials that you might discover, the other thing you do to discover your potential is to, you challenge yourself. It's like take a bit of a look at yourself and think about what's not so good for you could improve. And you should improve by your own standards, and that won't improve. You set yourself a little goal. Maybe you're not studying at all and you are at university, and maybe you are at work and you've got this stack of paper there, and you haven't looked at the damn stack for like a month, and you know that you should be, or you're bothering yourself at night because you're avoiding that. It's like, maybe a thing, I've avoided that stack of paper completely for 1 month. I'm quite a coward when it comes to whatever snakes might be hiding in that stack of paper. How about tomorrow? I just put that stack of paper in front of me and my desk, and I glance through it for 15 seconds, see if I can do that. It's like, you set yourself a goal of improvement. It's a humble goal. There is nothing you could do to improve. You know what they are, and there is some small steps that you could take, that you might take, that would put you in that direction. And then the question is, are you big enough to take those small steps? Are you capable of grappling with the fact that you are fundamentally flawed to the point where you have to break things down into almost checklist steps in order to manage them? An answer to that is, yeah, you are. Most people have things they avoid, they're afraid of. So I would say to some degree, it's the lot of everyone. People vary in the degree to which they've conquered that. And you do meet people from time to time who are extraordinarily disciplined, but most of the time, they've got discipline in exactly this manner. It's through slow improvement, and then challenge yourself. It's like, could I do this? That would be better. Then you find out, and then you think, is there something slightly larger and more challenging that I could do that would be better? And you try it to find out, and as you try it, you find out. Generally, you get better at it. You can take on larger and larger challenges. You take responsibility for yourself. That's part of standing up straight with your shoulders back. It's like take on the world, man, but only at the level that you can manage. When you're ignorant and blessed and biased and deeply flawed and immature, it's where everyone starts. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew, but it doesn't mean that you can wrestle with a part of reality, some part of that small enough so that you have a good shot at victory, and then you attain victory over some small part of chaos. Then you're a person who's victorious over chaos. You're just a beginner, but that's who you are, and then maybe you can get unbelievably good at that, and do that by challenging yourself humbly at a level that you're able to function. It's easier to understand if you think about a child that are trying to rear properly, and you want to make that child, help that child reveal their highest potential, whatever that is, whatever that means. And what do is you don't set them a series of impossible tasks in the hope of understanding their self-confidence. You form a relationship with them that is predicated on your interest in their highest mode of being, and then you offer them challenges that are precisely optimized by their ability, right? So they can do them, but they have to stretch. The two elements of their ability would be what they can do and what and how much they're capable of transforming what they can do. And an optimal challenge stretches you to the end of you can do, and then into the domain of how you can transform. You have to be humble and wise enough to understand that you might have an aim pretty down low, especially in those places where you're not functioning well, and it might be so embarrassing that you cannot bring yourself to fathom that is actually who you are. We need to less of arrogant ego, because it's precisely what is interfering with moving forward. It's a part of the adversarial process that stops moral progress. You're too proud who you think you are to notice what you're like, so that you could change properly. You don't want to sacrifice that part of yourself. It's probably associated with some delusion that helps you maintain a positive, although very fragile self-image. In the absence of genuine effort, it's not to be recommended. So how yourself by watching and paying attention. It's not thinking exactly, it is not imagination, it's watching like you are a snake, because a snake watches like cold-bloodedly with no intentional reaction, just to see what is there, doesn't allow what is wanted or desired to interfere with what is observed. So you watch yourself like that, as if you don't know who are you. Well, that's the beginning, and then challenge yourself continually to see how far past yesterday you could push today and tomorrow, and to continually experiment with expanding the domains that not only to your competence, but for the ability to increase that competence. The upper limits to that is proportional of that moral effort that you put into it. The more is that guided by the highest of all possible vision, right? The alliance with the highest of all possible conceivable good. The more is campaigned by truth in speech and reaction, the more you will develop your potential. And I believe that potential to be as unlimited in the upward direction, more unlimited in the world direction than it is unlimited in the direction that brings people to the political and social hells that so often characterize the world that we inhabit. And so I suppose I have to be willing to undertake that as an adventure, because it's hell of doing and thing to bear. That kind of responsibility, it takes a person out of ordinary, it takes them out of themselves, but there is a deep meaning to be had in that, and it is, and there isn't anything better than you can do. There is an old idea that you go into the abyss. It's an idea that you can gaze into the abyss, you gaze along, and you want to find in the abyss is a monster. That's a dragon at the bottom of the abyss. Let's say that Satan himself, for a matter. But if you go into that as deeply as you can, what you find is you find your fragmented father, its complex condition, in a separated condition, and you revivively that. Well, what does that mean? It means something. It means that if you look at the darkness, you find that light. That's one thing I mean, and that light really stands out against the darkness, but the light is to be found in the darkness. So that's very interesting thing. That's a quest narrative, but it means more than that. It means something fundamental. So for example, that if you take yourself out of your current state of safety and you put yourself in a new situation, you will learn, right? You will incorporate the information so that a cognitive issue, but isn't all that happens. What happens is that new genes turn out with new codes for production of your new proteins. That happens neurologically. New parts of our turn on. And so the idea is that if you can move yourself out into the world and push yourself out against a maximum array of challenges, more and more of you turns on. And then the question would be, well, well, what would you be if all of you could be turned on, was turned on? And the answer would be, you would be the resurrection of your Father. That's what you would be. And so that why church Christ says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to Father except through me. What that means is that if you take an unbearable burden of being voluntarily, then that transforms you into the ancestral Father. And that's true. And so that's unbelievably optimistic. It's so interesting because it's far beyond your belief. While the world is characterized by suffering and by malevolence of depth that is virtually beyond comprehension. But if you choose to comprehend that, what you discover is that the light that destroys darkness. And that's really something to discover. There isn't discovery that's more profound to them. That the search for the Holy Grail or the Philosopher's Stone, all of that. If you actually want something, you can have it. Now, the question that would be, well, what do you mean by actually want? And then the answer is that you reorient your life into every possible way to make the probability that will occur as certain as possible. And that's a sacrificial idea, right? It's like you don't get everything, obviously, but maybe you can have what you need, and maybe all you have to do to get is ask. But asking isn't a whim at today's wish. It's like you have to be deadly serious about it. You have to think, okay, I'm taking stock of myself, and if I was going to live properly in the world, I was going to get and set myself up. Such a thing being would justify itself in my estimation. And I don't mean as a harsh judge. Exactly what is it that I would aim at? You could try this. This is a form of prayer, knocking. Sit on your bed one day and ask yourself, what remarkably stupid thing am I doing on a regular basis to absolutely screw up my life? And if you actually ask the question, but you have to want to know the answer, right? Because because this is actually what asking the question means. It doesn't mean just mouthing the word. It means you have to decide that you want to know. You will figure out that so fast. It'll make your hair curl. You're perfectly capable of thinking. God only knows how. You're perfectly capable of immense imagination and dream fantasy. It's God only knows how you do all of that. What would happen if you consult yourself about the best possible outcome for you? You might get an answer. In order for us to set things right, we have to understand that we have to take on the burden of ultimate responsibility. Not only as if it is ours, which is, but as if it isn't everything better that we could do. You have an ethical obligation to lift the heaviest load you possibly conceive of, and that's the primary call to adventure in life. You need a meaning in your life to forestall the suffering and to make you strong enough to raise malevolence. Where is the meaning to be found? Right. Impulsive pleasure and happiness. No, responsibility. Oh, who would have guessed that? It's not part of narrative. What makes life worth living is to pick up, take the catastrophe and embrace it and carry it, and to realize through that process who you are. When I talk to audience about the relationship between responsibility and meaning, they inevitably go dead silent. There is a rustle. There is not a cough. It's like, is that a secret? Is that a secret? It's voluntarily adoption of responsibility. It's like, well, that's the central message to the West. It's like to pick up your cross and bear it. And everyone's being told that, but they do not know what it means because it has not been articulated enough so that it becomes, something that is practical. It's like, yes, look at the terrible responsibilities you have right in front of you. Your family is hunting. You're in trouble. There is a problems in that, it's like all of that's right here. And all you have to do is to take responsibility for that. And then you've got what you need. It is something too magnificent that happens pales in comparison. So it's cruel happiness. And young people know that. They're pursuing pleasure. No wonder. But there is nothing in that that's sustaining. And all it does to make you cynical. It's like, is that all there is? Another one thing and one night stand. Another being party. It's not like I have anything in principle against some of that youthful hedonism. Look, the universities have turned into places of parties. Why? Well, because that's what the students find best to do there. Well, that's not good. What you want to offer them is to reason not to party. It's like, you got not to understand. You come to this class hangover. You're not gonna be able to get it. You're not gonna be able to write properly. You're not gonna able to write properly. You're gonna pay a price for that hedonism. It's like the price will be too high for you to bear. It's like, oh, well, enough hedonism for me, then I've got something important to do. That's the way out of that. Before you can be a painter, you can paint what's beyond more mere money. You have to include that discipline, skill, and lot of that painful reception and hard grinding work. It's the sacrifice of the present, of the future. But once you manage that things open up. That's why we have disciplines, right? I mean, the words aren't there by accident. You have to narrow yourself first, and then you can broaden outward. And that's part of the process of maturation. That's a part of sacrifice of childhood. Say in childhood you're nothing but potential, but it's not realized. You don't know how to realize it, and so that the question is, well, how do you get to a point where you realize the potential? And the answer is you sacrifice almost half the time, and it's a single direction. And so that the thing about growing up is that where you're teenager and young adult, you have to sacrifice everything you could have been as a child to do the one thing that you're aiming at. But then that opens up. Everyone in the right mind knows that there is a million ways of doing things wrong and one way, if you're lucky, to do things right. And so the notion that it is very, very narrow pathway that you trade upon. If you're doing things right, that's wisdom. That's the line between chaos and order that you are supposed to be on constantly. It's a very, very thin line, because if you're a little bit too far in one direction, then it is too much chaos. And if you're a little too far in the other direction, then it's too much order. Both of those aren't good. The balance has to be exactly right. You can feel that. I truly believe that you can feel that. I think it's your deepest instinct. It's your deepest instinct. I mean that biologically. It don't mean that metaphorically. I think that your psycho is arranged to exist in a cosmos that is composed to chaos and order. I think that's why you have the hemisphere structure that you have. Then when you feel as if you're meaningfully engaged in the world, when the terror of the morality stripes away and you're engaged and it's timeless, that is deepest instinct you have telling you that you're in the right place at the right time. Then what do you is practice being there. Practice being there. That's the narrow spots that's so difficult to find. You wander around it. Maybe if you're lucky, you can watch. This is an experiment. Watch your sofa 2 weeks like you don't know who you are, because you don't. So watch your sofa 2 weeks and notice there is gonna be times when things are proper. They're arranged properly for you. It's not easy to notice, because when they are arranged like that, you're so engaged. You don't exactly notice, but you will see, oh, I'm in the right place. It's like, okay, how did I get there? What am I doing right? How is it that this could happen more often? I'd like this to happen more often. How would I have to conduct myself in order for that to happen more often? Then you practice that, and then maybe instead of 10 minutes a month, an hour a day, and then it's 4 hours a day. Maybe if you're extraordinarily careful, then you get to a point where you're like that a good proportion of the time. You're not a master of your own house. There are stripes that dwell within you, meaning you have a will and can exercise a certain amount of control over your being. But there are all sorts of things that occur within you that seem to be beyond your capacity to control your dreams. For example, that's really good example of your impulses. For example, you might think of those as so foreign from you that you don't even want them to be part of you. But more subtly even, how about what you're interested in? What compels you? Where does that come from exactly? Because you cannot conjure it up of your own accord. If you're a student and you're taking difficult course, you might say to yourself, well, I need to sit down and study of 3 hours, but then you sit down and this happens. Your attention goes everywhere, and you might say, well, whose attention is it then if it goes everywhere? Because you say your attention. Maybe you would be able to control it, but you cannot. And so then you might think, Jen, then just exactly what the hell controlling it? And you might say, well, it is random. Well, it's better not to be random. There is elements of randoms in that. Here it's not random. It's driven by action of phenomena that I think are best considered as something like sub-personalities. You can make yourself interested in something. Interest manifests itself and gigs you. That's a whole different thing. And so what is it that gripping you? And how do you conceptualize that? Is that a divine power? Well, it's a divine as far as you're concerned about it. It grips you and you cannot do anything about it. And so there is a calling in you towards that you are compelled by and what you're interested in. And sometimes that might be very dark and sometimes not. But you're compelled forward by your interest. And so the idea that what moves you away from your country and your father's house and that comfort of your childhood home is something that is beyond you and you listen to and are taken to. That's exactly right. And you can say, well, I don't want to call that God. I like it. It doesn't matter what you call it exactly. It doesn't matter to what it is called, and I still. And if you don't listen to, that's the other thing. If you don't listen to, and I've talked to enough people now, as old as I am, I know that this absolutely, if you don't listen to the things that becomes you forward, you will pay for it like you cannot possibly imagine. You will have everything that is terrible about life in your life, and nothing about it that's good and worse. You will know that it was your fault and you are squandered what you could have had. So this is not only a calling forth, but a warning. One of the things that I've noticed in my life is that nothing I've ever done was wasted. And by done, I mean put my heart and soul into life. Attempted with all my effort. That's always worked and my soul into. Now, I didn't always work the way I expected to work. That's the whole difference issue. But the payoffs from it was always positive. Something of value always occurred to me when I made the sacrifice necessary to do something worthwhile. Go somewhere you don't understand. You have to go into the unknown, and that's God first commanded. Go into the unknown because you already know what you know, and so that's not enough unless you're not enough. And if you're not enough and you don't think you're enough, then you have to go where you haven't been. Get away from your family enough so that you can establish your independence. And that isn't because there is something wrong with your family, but it means get away. I talk to people very frequently. Those families have provided them with too much protection and they know it themselves, and that means they're deprived of necessity. And you have to get yourself away from your dependency in order to allow necessity to drive you forward, and that's to become independent and to become mature. We've been fed this unending diets of rights and freedoms, and there is something about that. There is something about that so pathologically wrong, and people are striving for the antidotes, and the antidote is truth and responsibility. It isn't because that's what you should do in some I know better and someone knows better for you what you should do things. It's that the secret to a meaningful life. Without a meaningful life, all you have is to suffering and despair and all of that self-contempt, and this is not enough. It's necessary for men to stand up and take responsibility. If you were able to reveal the beat of yourself to you in the world, then you would be an overwhelming force for good, and whatever errors might be made along the way would wash out in the works if you forthrightly pursue that which God directs you to pursue. Let's say that's all things are possible, and so you don't know the limits of human endeavor. We truly don't. And if premature puts you a cap on what it is you are, what it is we're capable of, and so you're already something. And maybe you're not so bad in your current configuration, but you might wonder if you did nothing for the next 3 years. Put yourself together. Just exactly what would you be able to do? You might think, well, that's worth finding out, but of course there is a adoption of responsibility. There is lots of world to fix. Everything that bothers you about the world and yourself should be fixed, and you can do that. I have a friend. He lives in Montreal. His name is James Simon. He's a great painter and he's taught me a lot of things. He helped me design my own house and beautify it, and I bought some painting from him a couple of years ago, and he did this series of painting where he went around North America and stood in different places, and then he painted the view from her down and his feet planted in different places on roads and desert and the ocean. Yeah, well, he was trying to make a point, and point was whatever you are, it's worth paying attention, because all things, places that he visited, he looked at exactly where he was, standing up by side of the road in the desert, sort of mundane in some senses, but maybe he put 40 hours into the painting. It's very, very realistic painting with really good lights. What he's telling you as a painter and everything is worth paying attention to an infinite amount, and you don't have enough time. The artist doesn't do that for you. The artist looks and and looks and looks and keep looking that gives you that vision. And so you can look at the painting and it reminds you that everything that there is right here. Where are you? And that's a hard thing to realize, but it's actually true. And so I've been telling people online on various ways in lectures that they should start fixing up the world by cleaning up the rooms, how you would like your life to be and what you would like your character to be 3 or 5 years down the road. If you were taking care of yourself like you were taking care of someone that actually cared about, you have to split yourself into 2 people and treat yourself like someone you respect for and that you want best for. That's not easy because people don't necessarily have respect for themselves, and they do not necessarily want what's the best for themselves because they have a lot of self-contempt and a lot of self-hatred, a lot of guilt. I think you have an obligation. It's one of the hardest and highest moral obligation to treat yourself as if you're a creature of a value, how you would like your friendship to be conducted, because it's useful to surround yourself with people who are trying to move forward, and more importantly, who are happy when you move forward and not happy when you move backward, not when you fall. That isn't what I mean, but when you're doing self-destruction things, your friends shouldn't be there to cheer you on. You look at the world through a story. You can't help it. The story is what gives value to the world, or a story is what you extract from the value of the world. You can look at it either way. You're somewhere and it's not good enough. That's the eternal human predicament. Wherever you are isn't good enough. To some degree, that's actually a good thing, because if it was good enough, well, there is nothing for you to do. So it's actually maybe a good thing that is insufficient, and that might be why someone sometimes having less is better than having more. I don't want to be Polana about that. I don't that there is a deprivation that can reach to the point where it is completely counterproductive. But it isn't always the case that starting with little is, if you start with little, you start with more responsibility and possibility. It's something like that. So you move from what is unbearable about the present to some better future. And if you don't have that, then you have nothing but threat and negative emotion. You have no position and positive emotion, because the positive emotion is guaranteed in the conception of better future and the audience that you generate yourself, that you're moving towards it. That's where the positive and fulfilling meaning of life comes. So you want to set up this structure properly. It is very, very important. And so what it means is that you want to be going somewhere that's good enough, so that the going is worth the while. And you can ask yourself that. And we know what's wrong with life. It's rife with suffering and deception and evil. It's all that. Obviously, okay, what would make the journey worthwhile? Or you can ask yourself that. It's like, all right, in order to bear up under this load, what is it that would need to be striving to attain? And if you ask yourself that knock and door will open. That's what that means. If you ask that, then from it, you will think, well, there is no way I would do that. It's like, well, you don't like what you can do. You don't know what's possible, and you're not as much as possible you could be. So only God only knows what you could do and have and give if you sacrifice everything to it. You have to sacrifice that which is most valuable you can currently, that is stopping you. God only knows what that is. It's certainly the worst of you. It's certainly that. God only knows to what degree you're in love with the worst of you. Resentment is a key human motivation. I would say it's a great teacher. To listen to your resentment is one of the greatest, the best thing you can possibly do. Resentment only means one of two things. It means either shut the hell up, grow up, quiet, winning, and get to it. That's one thing. I mean, or someone is playing the tyrant for you. Might even be you, or you have something to say and do that you should say and do, put it up to stop. And so maybe resentment can show you the pathway to doing that. A resentful person wants other people to change. And if you're resentful, then your motivations aren't trustworthy. In fact, they're very, very dark. And what should you do? Interested. How do you treat your own resentment? I would say, well, Solzhenitsyn, who is a great admirer of Solzhenitsyn, his work, The Gulag Archipelago, was one of the things that brought down the Soviet Union. And he said that one man who stopped lying could bring down a tyranny. He said that was some authority. He said when he was in the Gulapi camp, meditating on how the hell he got there. And he had a rough life, man. I mean, first of all, he was on the Russian front at the beginning of the World War II, and then he was thrown in the Gulag camps. And then he was just the beginning of the adventure, man. He had a rough life. He was in a camp. He was thinking, what's the hell? He did that here? What did I get here? What's going on? He had Hitler and Stalin to blame, right? So if you need someone to blame, man, Hitler and Stalin, that's great, but that isn't what he did. He said he meditates for a while once he realized that he might have something to do in some strange way with the way things turn out for him. And he said he went over his life with a comb in his memory. He thought, okay, where did I go wrong? But by my own judgment, when there was a path in front of me, when did I take the path that I knew shouldn't take? Because you all know that, right? You know, sometimes you don't know if what you're doing is good or if it's bad. It's just ignorance. You just don't know, but sometimes you blindly will know, and you don't the things you know you shouldn't do anymore. That happens a lot. And why do you do that? Spike is a part of that. Stupidity. There is all sort of reasons, but you certainly know you do that, okay? Well, what would happen if I took responsibilities for where I am in this concentration camp, and then I went over my whole life and tried to figure out all the things I did that were wrong by my estimation, and that increased the possibility that I would get there. And then what would happen if I tried to set them all right now in the present? And then why he wrote the Gulag, and one of the consequences of that, as I said, was it sped the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So hey, that's not bad. You make a real confession. You really repeat. You do your penance with is writing this book. You completely change the geopolitical landscape of the world, and that's worth thinking about, because that's not only him who did that. Nelson Mandela did something quite similar. It's not so impossible. And so the idea that what you should do if you're feeling resentful about nature of being or suffering too much for your own life, let's say, is straighten the damn thing out. Seriously, try it. Try it for a year even. Try it for a week. Try not doing things you know you shouldn't do. Try not saying the thing you know to be false. And just watch what happens. You might as well give it, a shot, right? Because you say, well, I'm in all for a year. I'm gonna do things right, and then I'll just stand back and watch how things unfold, and maybe I'll reconsider at the end of the year. It's like, try it. I mean, I would say I have thousands of letters now from people who are saying, hey, I tried that, and hey, it worked. I read this great line in a T.S. Eliot play called Cocktail Party, and in it, this woman comes up to a psychiatrist and she says, I'm having really rough time of it. I'm suffering badly. My life is not going well. And then she says, I hope that there is something wrong with me. And the psychiatrist says, what the hell do you mean by that? And she says, well, there is how I looked at it. There is either something wrong with the world. I'm just in it, and that's how it is. And then what am I doing to do about that? Because it's a whole world, or maybe I could be fortunate, and there is something wrong with me that's causing all this unnecessary suffering, and I could just set it right. I could just learn. I could set it right and well. I've been thinking about that for a very long time, and I think, well, if your life it isn't going that way, it is, you can find something else to blame, which is pretty convenient for you and also relatively easy. Or you would think, okay, I don't like life. I don't like the way my life is unfolding, because I don't think life in general, because it's tragic and tainted with evil. How do I know if my judgment is accurate? And the question is, well, have I really done everything I possibly could to set my life right? Because maybe I shouldn't be judging its quality or the quantity of life itself, or being itself for the matter. If I haven't done everything I possibly could to set my life straight, well, so there is a task. There is a humility element. It took me a long time to understand why there is religious injunctions supporting humility to understand what the word really mean in the technical sense. And it means something like this. It means what you don't know. More important than what you know, then what you don't know can start to be your friend. You see, people are very defensive about what they know, but the thing is, you don't know enough. You can't tell you don't know enough, because your life is not what it could be, and neither of your life of people around you. You just don't know enough. And so what that means is that every time you encounter some evidence that you're ignorant, someone points it out, you should be happy about that, because you think, oh, you just told me, how am I get through the real message that you're telling me? But if you could actually tell me some way that I'm wrong, and then maybe give me a hint about how not to be wrong about like that, well, I wouldn't have to be wrong like that anymore. That would be a good thing. And you could embark on that adventure by listening to people. And if you listen to people, they will tell you amazing things if you listen to them. And many of those things are little tools that you can put in your toolkits, like Batman. And then you can go into the world and use those tools. And you don't have to fall blindly into it quietly so often. And so humanity element is, well, do you want to be right, or do you want to be learning? And it is deeper than that. Do you want to be the king who's already gets everything figured out? Or do you want to be the continually transferring hero or fool, for a matter, who is getting better all the time? And that's actually a choice. It's a deep choice. It's better to self-transforming fool who's humble enough to make friends with what he or she doesn't know and listen to what people think. Listening to transformative exercise. If you listen to people in your life, for example, if you actually listen to them, they will tell you what's wrong with them and how to fix it and what they want. They cannot help it. If you start listening, because people are so shocked if you actually listen to them, they tell you all the things they might not have even intended to, things they don't know. Then you can work with that. The other thing that's so interesting now, and then you have a meaningful conversation. You have a good conversation with someone. You walk away, you think, jeez, we really connected. I know more than I did. When I came away from that conversation, during my conversation, you're really engrossed in it. That feeling of being engrossed, or feeling of meaning, the feeling of conversation. So your brain produces that feeling of meaning for it. It says, oh yeah, this is exactly where you should be right here and now. It's right place and time for you. And that's great place for occupy. And so a good conversation where people are listening, how exactly that nature, and the reason it has that nature is because it is, in fact, transformative. It's one of the terminism of clinical psychology. It's, if you're a clinical psychologist, a huge part of what you do is just listen to people. It's like they come in, they're unhappy, they would rather not to be something like that. You say, well, why do you think you might be unhappy? And they don't know. They have some ideas and they have to be ramble around for a year before they figure out what they're unhappy. They get rid of a branch of reasons what they thought they were unhappy that are untrue. And then you get to the heart of problem, and then you might ask them, well, if you could have what you wanted so that your life would be okay, what would be look like? Then they have to ramble around a bunch because they don't really know. But the listening will straighten them out, because people think by talking, and in order to think, you have to have someone to listen, because it's very hard to think. Hardly anyone can think, and even the people who can think can only think about a limited number of things. But almost everything and everybody can talk, and you can listen to yourself talk. And if someone listens to you, then you will also have a foil for your thoughts, because you can watch the person when you're talking and see if you're boring, to see if you're amusement, or if you're engrossing, all of those things. If you're arguing with your wife, let's say, or your husband, a big party is going to want to win. That's stupid, because you don't want that. You want to defeat your wife in an argument? Oh well, great. If she was going to disappear tomorrow, no problem. But you're gonna live with defeated, miserable her for the next week? That's not so good. So listen and you think, okay, well, there is what I think and said. And maybe even make it a little stranger and more elaborated. That was the case, the original. It turns so that you get the damn argument right, because you don't want to win. You want to fix the problem. That's the winning.